Welcome to Wichita Liberty TV with Bob Weeks.
Hello, I'm Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV, your weekly source for news, analysis, and commentary about Wichita and Kansas government and public policy. We're broadcast on KGPT, channel 26.1, also its companion website, kgpt26.com. Some of you may know me from my blog, The Voice for Liberty, that's on the internet at wichitaliberty.org. There the motto is individual liberty, limited government, and free markets in Wichita and Kansas. So I cover things that may not be covered by the Wichita Eagle or other television stations or radio, or if we do cover the same news, I'll do it from the perspective of economic freedom, limited government, and individual liberty, because these are the things that are important, and these are the things that we find so often under attack by our government, be it at the federal, state, or local level. So please, visit wichitaliberty.org. You can subscribe to the email newsletter I send 2 or 3 times a week. And if you'd like to contact me, you'll find my email address and telephone there, or just remember bob.weeks@gmail.com. Well, last week, Kansas Policy Institute released the results of a survey of Wichita voters concerning Wichita's economy and its government. But before we look at these results from Kansas Policy Institute, let's take a look back at what the city of Wichita and its partners have done regarding citizen surveys. Well, about 1 year ago, the results of the Wichita-Sedgwick County Community Investment Plan Survey was released. This was a survey conducted by mail with a large sample of voters, and it was created and administered by the Hugo Wall School of Urban and Public Affairs at Wichita State University. And we need to look at this survey process to see if the results will be useful as our city looks to its future. And there are some problems, and here are 2 questions that have such severe problems that the results are not likely to be a reliable indicator of what citizens believe and what they want government to do. So one problematic question from this survey that participants answered is this. The question was, local governments should continue to use public resources to encourage airlines to increase the number and reduce the cost of flights through Wichita Mid-Continent Airport. Now, reading this question, you would assume that public resources have worked to increase the number of flights, wouldn't you? And here's another related question. It is recommended change in investments to increase the number of flights and decrease the cost to fly into and out of the Wichita Mid-Continent Airport. So again, it would be natural for survey respondents to assume that the investment has been successful in increasing the number of flights. But here's the problem. If we consider the number of monthly departing flights, Wichita is not doing well compared to the rest of the nation. The chart you're viewing right now illustrates. Of particular note is that over the past 2 or 3 years, the trend of flights nationally is level, while the trend of flights available in Wichita is declining. Now, this trend is an example of unintended consequences of government intervention and regulation. The Affordable Airfares Program, that's what pays a subsidy to airlines in Wichita, that program imposes a rough form of price control on airfares in Wichita. If the program did not do that, and it appears it does succeed at this goal, then there would be no point in having the program. But the inevitable effect of price controls is that less is supplied compared to what would have been supplied otherwise. This economic phenomenon is reliable and predictable. And while travelers certainly prefer low airfares to high, this is not the only consideration. For those who need to travel on short notice, the availability of flights is very important. So the problem with this survey is that these questions would lead survey participants to assume that the city has been successful in increasing the number of flights available in Wichita. But the data doesn't support the premise of these 2 questions. The questions are based on incorrect facts, and this in turn casts doubt over the reliability and usefulness of these questions. Well, Sedgwick County Commissioner Coral Peterjohn also noticed some issues with the survey instrument too. He noted that the survey does not provide any place for undecided or any other way to express an uncertain response from citizens. Peterjohn said that since all of the questions force a response, there is a significant chance that citizens who are uncertain will be less likely to respond. This will not be helpful in getting an accurate picture of citizen opinion in our community. And Peter John also noticed that one section of the questions is flawed because all of the questions avoid the key phrase, "at what price?" He observed that if you ask me how many steaks I would want at 20 cents a pound versus $20 a pound, well, you'll get a very different answer. And this is one of the fundamental principles of economics, that the things we desire are scarce, and to get something we have to give up something else. And the ratio between the two, that is the price of things, is fundamental to human economic behavior. But the survey doesn't seem to recognize this. Well, Peter John also noticed that the survey uses the euphemism investment as a synonym for government spending. This will skew the results because investment is a loaded word. In our personal lives and also in business, investment is good. But government investment is really spending, and is usually done for very, very different reasons from those that individual people or business firms use for decision-making. Well, the survey that Wichita used also has philosophical problems. Here's an example of a question respondents were asked to agree or disagree with. The question read, local government, the school district, community organizations, and the business community should work together to create an investment climate that is attractive to business. Well, an attractive investment climate means different things to different people. Some people want a business investment climate where property rights are respected, where government refrains from meddling in the economy and transferring one person's property to another. An environment free from cronyism, in other words. But the Wichita way is, as we've learned, the way is cronyism, where government takes an active role in managing economic development. We in Wichita never know when our local government will take from us to give to politically favored cronies, or when City Hall will prop up and subsidize a competitor to your business. Well, so what then is the goal of the Wichita-Sedgwick County Community Investments Plan? Well, here's an excerpt from a paper titled Citizen Attachment, Building Sustainable Communities, which appeared in Government Finance Review, and the authors are Mark Glazer, Misty Bruckner, and Corinne Bannon, all associated with the Hugo Wallace School of Public and Urban Affairs at Wichita State University. Again, that's the institution that is facilitating the planning process for the city of Wichita and Sedgwick County. Well, here's what the authors wrote in this paper. They wrote, increasingly, citizens are retreating from their responsibilities to community and demanding more from government than they are willing to pay for. But change in local government behavior can be instrumental in reversing this trend by strengthening citizens' commitment to the well-being of their communities. Citizens who are committed to community are more willing to accept responsibility for the well-being of their fellow citizens and are also more likely to join with government and other parties to improve their communities. Citizens who are committed to community are also more willing taxpayers. That is, when government demonstrates that it can be trusted to invest public resources in ways that strengthen the community. The central thrust of this model is getting citizens and government to work together, but realistically, many communities will require new revenue, including additional tax dollars, if they are to assemble the critical mass of resources necessary for meaningful change. Accordingly, citizens who are willing to pay increased taxes are an important component of building sustainable communities. That's again from the Hugo Wallace School at Wichita State University. Well, citing results from the survey, Wichita Mayor Coral Brewer said, "We learned that more than 70% of our residents are willing to rise above their personal interests to do what's best for the community." Well, the problem with all this is that it relies on the false concept of a conflict between personal interests and what is good for the community. Now, in free markets, where people engage in voluntary actions, people advance their self-interest in one legitimate way, by finding out the goods and services that others want and then producing them. And if you can do this well and efficiently, you can earn profits. It's this quest for profits, self-interest in other words, that drives people to figure out what others want and then to work hard to provide that, and everyone benefits. The quest for profits could and should apply to areas that are under the control of government, but people are so afraid that someone will earn a profit by serving their fellow man. Recently, John Stossel on his television show spotlighted a park in New York City that is run by a private corporation with the aim of earning a profit. And people are happy with the park. They feel safe, even though the park doesn't discriminate and still lets homeless people stay there. There's commerce going on, the selling of food, for example. And people like that, and evidence of that is that there is profit being earned. But one of the guests that appeared on Stossel's show was critical and unhappy because someone was earning a profit, even though park patrons were happy with the park and most were unaware of the private sector operation and management. So when the park was operated by the city, for the common good that is, not many people used it. It was dirty, trashy, and people did not feel safe. But under the profit motive, people like the park and they use it. And the same homeless people as before, are allowed to stay in the park. So where is the conflict between personal interest and what is good for the community? Now, not everything government does is good, but when government dabbles in areas that the private sector can do very well, we will see problems. As an example, the city wants to help real estate developers. But the city of Wichita handled a recent situation so badly that the mayor apologized, saying, "We are also taking steps to ensure that we have integrity and openness when we solicit proposals for development in the core area." And citizens that pay attention at City Hall also know that there are several small groups that contribute heavily to political campaigns. Then the mayor and council members vote to give financial benefits to these people. And I'm not speaking of isolated incidents. This behavior is repeated over and over again. Some cities have laws against this type of behavior. But in Wichita, while we're being encouraged to put what is good for the community above our personal self-interest, we see City Hall run over by cronyism. That is, run over by people using city government for their own interests. Oh, they do it all in the name of the common good, of course. This is a severe problem with the city's survey and also with the group that is advising the city. Again, that's the Hugo Walsh School at Wichita State University. And it's also a problem with city bureaucrats and most elected officials. They view markets and profits as evil and government as good. Remember last week when we talked about the economist Brian Kaplan and his book, The Myth of the Rational Voter, Why Democracies Choose Bad Policies. He identifies 4 irrational biases that voters carry with them as they vote. And one that's important here is the anti-market bias, and here's its explanation. He wrote, "The public has severe doubts about how much it can count on profit-seeking business to produce socially beneficial outcomes. People focus on the motives of business and neglect the discipline imposed by competition. While economists admit that profit maximization plus market imperfection can yield bad results, non-economists tend to view successful greed as socially harmful per se." Joseph Schumpeter, arguably the greatest historian of economic thought, matter-of-factly spoke of the ineradicable prejudice that every action intended to serve the profit interest must be antisocial by this fact alone. Anti-market bias, he implied, is not a temporary, culturally specific aberration. It is a deeply rooted pattern of human thinking that has frustrated economists for generations. Continuing, Kaplan wrote, "There are too many variations on anti-market bias to list them all. Probably the most common error of this sort is to equate market payments with transfers, ignoring their incentive properties. Well, a transfer in economic jargon is a no-strings-attached movement of wealth from one person to another. These are things like welfare payments and also economic development subsidies in most cases as well." He said, "All that matters then is how much you empathize with the transfer's recipient compared to the transfer's provider. People tend, for example, to see profits as a gift to the rich. So unless you perversely pity the rich more than the poor, limiting profits seems like common sense. Yet, Kaplan continues, profits are not a handout, but a quid pro quo. If you want to get rich, you have to do something that people will pay for. Profits give incentives to reduce production costs, move resources from less valued to more valued industries, and dream up new products. This is the central lesson of The Wealth of Nations, the famous work by Adam Smith. The invisible hand quietly persuades selfish businessmen to serve the public good. For modern economists, these are truisms, yet teachers of economics keep quoting and quoting the passage. Why? Because Adam Smith's thesis was counterintuitive to his contemporaries, and it remains counterintuitive today. Well, that's Bryan Caplan. Well, this anti-market bias, I believe, strongly influences the thinking and attitude of our city leaders and also those advising and working for them. It's a serious problem. And then, after the results of the survey were announced, the city held a number of citizen engagement meetings last fall and winter. There were 102 meetings with 2,009 participants, according to the city, and I personally attended 2 meetings. These community meetings were structured in a way reminiscent of the Delphi method, which is described as a structured communication technique originally developed as a systematic interactive forecasting method which relies on a panel of experts. Others have a more skeptical view, believing that the Delphi technique leads citizens to believe that they have participated in community democratic decision-making, when in reality that was not the goal of the process. Well, the first of these meetings that I attended was organized by the local chapter of Americans for Prosperity. And Mike Schatz took video of the meeting, and you can view that video at my site, wichitaliberty.org. His description of the meeting is, the city of Wichita is holding a series of meetings to gain input from the public on future spending plans. The meetings are based off a survey the city conducted, which, by all accounts, was full of loaded questions geared toward promoting the programs that city officials want to see. In this meeting, one of the first in the series, citizens openly questioned the process and repeatedly asked for an end to cronyism and secrecy at City Hall. Well, near the end of these citizen engagement sessions, citizens were asked to vote on what they felt were the most important priorities. The voting was implemented by distributing clickers to participants. And at the first meeting I attended, the system did not work. At the second meeting, participants were so confused by the clickers that many did not know if they had voted or what they had voted for. Well, other feedback was collected from participants through paper forms, and the basic findings from these were that participants favor spending more, with most favoring an additional sales tax of 1 cent per dollar. But we have to realize that this is not a scientific survey, in the sense that participants were selected randomly, as is the usual case with public opinion surveys. Instead, the participants that participated in these 102 meetings were self-selected, and largely people who are interested in city government. And most of these, I would hazard to guess, they like city government and have a favorable opinion of it, and they believe that government has a role in making our city better. And most, and again I'm just guessing, would like city government to expand and have a larger role, meaning higher taxes. And that was reflected in the voting. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. So we've seen what the city of Wichita has done regarding the measurement of citizen opinion. And last week, the Kansas Policy Institute released the results of a survey of Wichita voters concerning Wichita's economy and government. In its news release, KPI concluded that Wichita voters are opposed to business incentives, want to pursue privatization over tax increases, and have concerns about how City Hall has recently spent money. Well, this is a scientific survey of 502 registered Wichita voters, and it was conducted by Survey USA, a company that is widely used across the country. And the full results, crosstabs, questions, and methodology are available either at kansaspolicy.org or also at my site, wichitaliberty.org. Well, here are some of the survey results illustrated in charts that I made. Well, the first question the survey asked was, in the past few years, have Wichita city officials used taxpayer money efficiently or inefficiently? And overall, 58% of the respondents believe city spending was inefficient, compared to 28% believing spending was efficient. And I also created charts for this question showing the results broken down by political party and political ideology. The results are surprisingly consistent. An exception is that political independents more strongly believed that city spending was inefficient. Those identifying as politically liberal were more likely to say that city spending was inefficient too. Well, the second question in the survey was, in general, do you agree or disagree with the idea of local governments using taxpayer money to provide subsidies for certain businesses for economic development? And overall, 59% disagreed with using taxpayer money to provide these subsidies, while 34% agreed. And the results are fairly consistent again across political party and ideology, although Republicans are somewhat more likely to agree with using taxpayer funds for economic development incentives, as also are those who identify as political moderates. And the third question asked, would you personally be willing to pay a higher sales tax in the city of Wichita to fund incentives to businesses expanding in Wichita or moving here from other states? Well, overall, 63% said no and 28% said yes. Democrats were a little more likely to say no to this, while Republicans were more likely to say yes. And that pattern was repeated when broken down by political ideology, with the liberals more likely to answer no and conservatives more likely to answer yes. While asking whether voters would be willing to pay a higher sales tax was repeated for several other areas of government spending. In these questions, again asking if Wichita voters would be willing to pay higher sales tax to provide certain services, a definite pattern appeared. Voters are willing to pay for things that are fundamental in nature and less willing to pay for others. As can be seen in this chart, voters are willing to pay for infrastructure and more willing to pay for maintenance of existing infrastructure than for new infrastructure. And voters are most willing to pay for securing a long-term water source. For business incentives, downtown development, and convention centers, Wichita voters express less willingness to pay higher sales tax to fund these items. For the first three things, the things that most people would agree are fundamental concerns of government, the average was 68% of voters willing to pay a higher sales tax rate. But for the last three, the average was only 30%, which is greater than a 2-to-1 margin. Politically, we call that a landslide. And these results are quite a bit different from the results the city of Wichita produced through its surveys and meetings. Well, KPI asked other questions that we'll explore in future episodes of Wichita Liberty TV. Well, Kansas Policy Institute is planning a series of public forums over the coming months to examine multiple options for long-term water solutions, economic development, and infrastructure. National experts on privatization and other options will be brought in, as well as governmental officials who have successfully used privatization to provide services. And the effectiveness of taxpayer subsidies will also be explored. Local elected officials and other civic leaders will be invited to participate. I'll be attending these events, and I hope you will too. Well, this survey from Kansas Policy Institute and the upcoming events are important, and it is nearly certain that Wichita voters will be asked to approve a sales tax increase. How much of a tax increase, what the funds will be used for, and when the election will be held are not known at this time. But we know that left to its own devices, government wants to grow. The impulse of elected officials and bureaucrats is to grow government. The cronies that feed off of government, they want it to grow too. And institutions such as the Hugo Walls School of Urban and Public Affairs at Wichita State University are committed to growing government. Although they won't admit it, they just want better government, they say. But we know that the trade-off when government grows, when more activity is shifted away from voluntary participation in markets towards government, well, we get less freedom, less liberty, less prosperity, and the loss of civil society. Well, thank you for watching this episode of Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks.